some perception of an increase of salary over time, nobody received them. So, but certainly those positions received raises at a greater frequency from '01 until now, which is part of the reason why they, along with just about every other position, is out of whack. And I'm not suggesting that the work that I do is comparable to a firefighter or the building official, but rather to say that these are people that manage departments, and there's a certain amount of management and daily responsibilities that we also carry. To say we're equal to, better than, worse than, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that the positions that we hold come with a pay that, when you take out the cost, as Mr. York said, the compensation for attending meetings, the trustee compensation. In other words, when I was appointed to go from a trustee to the supervisor, I got about a $4,800 raise, somewhere around there. $48,000 raise, I'm sorry. So that wage, that additional amount to oversee, the operations of the township and a lot of the responsibilities that come on a full-time basis, is about a $48,000 job. It's one way of looking at it, but let's say this for sure. I'm hearing a common thread, at least from those trustees that have spoken, the numbers need to be addressed. But I need ideas. Like I say, I can't make a motion here, but I need some idea of what this board thinks.
Well, so,
go ahead.
here's the thing, here's my thoughts. And I understand we didn't move the salaries for a long time because we had a lot of issues with funding, finances.
And politics.
And politics, exactly. But here's the way I look at it. We're stepping out of the woods. We're about to step out of the woods, but we're still in the swamp. We still have a deficit in the fire department. And I gotta tell you, men, until that's resolved, I'm not voting on anything. And if you think that the trustees are overpaid, maybe we need a decrease. And you're comparing your salary and saying, $9,500, maybe we should decrease our salary until we have the deficit resolved. But I'm telling you right now, I will not vote for any kind of increase. And when you said you're gonna put an increase in at the election, why would you do that? To me, if somebody wants to come in and do the work, have them come in at the current salary for the election in 2016. Why are you gonna say I'm gonna bump the cost of the salary up for new people coming in? It doesn't make any sense.
Because politically, it doesn't look like you're doing it for yourself.
Well,
And I will tell you what, I'm going to tell you right now, I take big time offense, Mr. Tominello, to that statement. I sat here on this board now through all of these contracts and said, if we're going to give the union a raise, everybody's going to get a raise. And you went right along with all those contracts for all these years, and now all of a sudden,
I'm not gonna discuss.
you do not, Mr. Tominello, get the opportunity now to say,
don't put
our
words in my
fire
mouth,
budget
Mr.
is
York.
under deficit, after you have been voting year after year after year after year of deficits in that department, and I've sat on this board and I've warned you all to stop spending $500,000 out of our fire fund, and now it's broke. And that's the politics of it, because it's always something. When you give the union and every other employee, and you vote yes on those contracts, and you negotiate those contracts for a raise, you do not now get to come back and say, no, I'm not doing anything because now all of a sudden I'm being conservative. The time to be conservative was when we were doing those union contracts, not now. And whether we raise these or not, quite honestly, I thought it was a crapshoot anyways. But our general fund is healthy, and we've done a good job with it. The fire fund, on the other hand, that's a whole nother nightmare that, quite honestly, we didn't tackle like we should have. And that's just facts. And come October, we all know, talking with Glenn, we're going to have to write the letter to the state that the fire fund is out of money. That's a fact. That's a fact. That comes from our finance director.
So why would we present something like this?
Because the fire fund, like we've always known, even when the other employees, the union AFSCME employees back in, I believe it was 2006, Adam, was it? 7?
I don't know what your
Five,
question
six,
is.
seven, 5, 6, 7, when the union employees were taking concessions
It was
and,
nine
and
and
not
10
getting
and
any raise, the fire union took a 3, 2.5, and 2% raise through arbitration. And the fire fund has always been distinct and on its own, period, in it for the fire, and the general fund has always been its own thing for the AFSCME and the other supervisory union. And one never touches the other. We never would take fire funds to pay my salary, or this salary, or
But it
the-
does make
the
a difference.
clerk's
We have to
office.
be fiscally responsible across the board,
all the time.
across the board. You know, working in silos never works.
So, Mr. Supervisor, I mean, a lot of us have spoken. I think, I understand what you're saying, we need, you know, if we're gonna come to a number, but I will say this. I think the jobs are underpaid. I thought that before I became a trustee, I think it today, I think the evidence, would substantiate that. I think we need to pay these jobs a fair amount of money so that we can expect that qualified people will be willing to serve in these roles. I mean, we need to do that. So from my perspective, it's more a question of what is that target and over what period of time do we make that adjustment? I think it's reasonable to say that we need an adjustment. It's about how much is the adjustment and over what period of time. I see no magic in the election. You know, I look at an adjustment as something that we could set a target for and pick a number, 3 years. Make an adjustment over a 3-year, that's just an example.
Okay.
Right? And I've looked at these numbers. I've spent a considerable amount of time working with the numbers that you've provided. I've done just some analysis of my own. I'm not an HR expert, but I just tried to put myself in the position of a resident that was looking at this and trying to look at it from a perspective of what would a township resident think about this? So I do think they're undervalued. I think that when we talk about a subject like this, we have a higher level of responsibility. This is a subject that's, as you said, is very serious. And I think when you're talking about adjusting the salary of members sitting on this panel, that it's a higher level of responsibility. We need to be fair, but I do think we need to be conservative. So that doesn't give you a number, but just kind of a high level of how I feel about it.
You know, like I said, we had somewhat of an agreement in 2008 that we would do the 2% or 2.5% per year.
2%.
Or 2% or whatever inflation was, and move them up slowly, but of course, because of the politics, and I've said it
Well,
on.
some
I
issues with the economy, too.
actually did an analysis of what would have happened. I took all these salaries and I said, what would have happened if we started a 2% increase? I picked 2010, and I went from 2010 through 2018. I took the supervisor, clerk, and treasurer, just to see what that would look like. So I ran those numbers up and said, if a 2% increase were granted, and I can tell you, that's low, but it's not unheard of during those years for folks to not get 2%. But be that as it may, I took 2%, and I just said, well, what would that bring those salaries to? And then the other thing I did was I looked at the salaries that were shown from the other communities, and quite frankly, just for an exercise, just to try to think through it, I dropped out Clinton Township, Macomb. I took out Clinton, Macomb, and Shelby, and then I did another average, just to see what that would look like. Why did I take those out? Because the populations there are 2 to 3 times the size of ours, as Mr. Brada pointed out. So I was just trying to come up with, and I would tend to agree that some of these other comparisons are interesting, but, you know, it's an
It's an
interesting.
apple and an orange.
So, I don't know, I would support some form of adjustment, depending on what the target is, and depending on how many years or how many increments we would propose putting that in.
I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think $65,000 is out of the question for these jobs. I don't think that's, I just don't. That puts us a little bit above, one step above water sewer foreman. But we also, you know, we talk about this, the supervisor union. You know, I run the treasurer's department. If I were in the supervisory union, I would be making $80,000 a year, right? I mean, I think that goes without saying that if the treasurer's job and the clerk's job and the supervisor's job were union supervisory positions based on what we pay right now, we would be, these positions would be $80,000, $85,000, $90,000 a year. To be
No.
quite honest, that's
No,
a
Darren,
fact.
the only issue that I have
Not
with
saying
that-
that's what we should get, I'm just
I know that.
throwing
but
that out.
The only issue I have with that, though, is you willfully campaign for the position at its pay. You're not in the
Right.
union. So that's, you're, again, comparing two different revenue sources. It's entirely different. I wouldn't compare yourselves against another position in the township that's not the same position. It would be like the, I don't know, like I have said before, it'd be
Yeah, I'm
like.
trying to take the politics out of it
Trying to manage
and-
programmers that are making more money than you are.
Just-
Programmers
two-
typically make a lot of money, you know?
2 points off,
So,
off your comments, David, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But what Mr. Tominello said, well, I don't see the value in the election. Well, what you just said is the value in the election. People run for a position, they know what it is. That's why these wages don't change mid-election.
Right.
That's the value in setting them for an election and setting them well in advance of an election so that people who are out in the public can say, gosh, that's an attractive number. I make more than that out in the private sector, but I'd be willing to come in and do public service. That's what these jobs are. I'd be willing at that number to go in. I know what it is. I'm eyes wide open. I know what it is. I don't have to come in and go, yeah, it's a big pay cut, but I might be able to adjust it later. That's why that's valuable. And as far as the comparisons, and I know you can parse the communities, you can't call them apples and oranges. These are the only things we have to compare ourselves to. We have internal comparables with management positions, so those are valid, and we also have external comparables with townships. And now you can splice the numbers different ways, and you can say, how are we gonna make these comparisons? Are we gonna make them on population? Are we gonna make them on square miles? Are we gonna make them on property value? Are we gonna make them on value per square miles? Because if you look at Harrison Township on a value per square mile comparable to all these, just on what we have 14.5, it's 59 million per square mile. But if you take out Selfridge Air National Guard Base, we're 101 million per square mile, which is the highest of all the communities on here on a per square mile value.
And it's also important to point out, and I've done this in conversation, I know throughout this subject. There probably isn't a community on here that doesn't have an HR director except Harrison Township. There probably isn't a supervisor here that sits through negotiations and arbitrations and handles the grievances except Harrison Township. Now, I can't speak to the communities that Mr. Huth represents, but I know that my peers, when I meet with supervisors, when we talk about the issues that we're dealing with, they don't discuss negotiations because they don't handle them. They're aware of them, but they don't literally do them. They don't literally participate in that process. They have HR people, for example, to do that. They have departments. So it's true that my peers in other communities may have a larger budget, but they use that budget to pay people to do a lot of the things that we three do on a regular basis to avoid basically the payroll for the oversight of the township. So it's true that we're not Macomb Township, but in some ways it's true that we're not Macomb Township or Shelby Township because the staff we have is a fraction of the size. But those jobs don't go away. They're transferred to the 3 full-timers.
I think it's a matter of, Mr. Supervisor, I really think from my perspective, it's a matter of where we set a target and how we get there.
Correct.
I see what you're saying, Mr. Witt, that knowing what it is as I run for election is valuable, but you could know what it was if we were to say at whatever point in time we decide upon this, here's the target, and in 2015 it'll be this. The target is this. In 2015 it's this. 16 it's that. 17 it's that. So I'm running for election. I know exactly what it's going to be in all those years.
Sure.
So I think we meet that.
That's okay, too.
And the other thing that we do as we spread it out is we limit the financial impact to the township, as opposed to saying these adjustments are going to total, let's call it $100,000 or $50,000. If we do it all today, it's $50,000 worth of impact. Sure. If we spread it over 3 years, a couple of things happen. The percentage becomes much more palatable, right? and the financial impact to the township becomes smaller. So that $40,000 that we're talking about, that we may run over in the development of the senior center, might be offset because we're spreading this over a period of time. That's all I'm saying. And we've still not talked about any numbers, and I don't know if we will. But that's what I'm thinking about.
Well, I hear these two things. I have not heard anything contrary to the fact that the wages need to be adjusted, number one. I've heard some mixed opinions about when they should be adjusted, and I've heard that they should be adjusted over a period of time and not in a lump sum like our peers have done. I'm good with all of those things. What I'm trying to get this board to understand, though, and make sure that we all understand, because I'm not any more comfortable with it than I am going through the process of campaigning and asking people to support you. It's an unnatural thing. It's a completely different thing than going to your boss and saying, look, here's setting the proverbial mouse on a doorstep saying, here's what I did, now I'd like a raise. The problem is the person I have to ask is me and you. So it has to be addressed eventually. In other words, if we all voted to say, come 2016, let's lower the wages to 30,000. I can't live on 30,000, so
No.
I wouldn't run. But there's a number that's reasonable.
Yep.
So we need to set a target of where that number needs to be, and we need to set a time frame of how to get there. And I'm good with that.
Something needs to be said here regarding.
Okay, sure.
And while I respect your opinion, Mr. Batanti, this is back to the catch-22. We're back in 2008, where we had the same discussion as a board and said, let's do it over time, right? Instead of just doing the lump sum, getting it done, and that's what the salary's gonna be for the next 15 years,
Okay.
right? We said, let's do it over time. Great, we did $2,500 plus 2%. Great, that seems reasonable. New board comes in 2009. You know what, property values are going down, we're not gonna do the 2%. Next year comes around, we're having a little bit of a budget deficit, we're not doing the 2%. That's because every year, this board, as a body, has to set those salaries at the budget process. So while I understand what you're saying, the simple fact is that because it's such a political thing, if we said you do whatever, 2,000, 2,000, 2,000 for the next, right? Doesn't matter.
Right.
It'll never happen because at every budget meeting, you're gonna have the union saying, you're not gonna wanna do a raise, because once you give anybody a raise, especially an elected official, the unions all want the same raise at the same time. So you sort of lose some bargaining chip power.
Yeah, but no matter what we do,
But,
it's
but,
gonna be
and
product
Ken
value.
and I had this discussion, and I told Ken, I said, this whole discussion's uncomfortable, I don't even like it, but whatever you decide, just decide it and be done with it, because when you look back at 10 years from now, whatever you decide to if the board decides to readjust any wages, you're probably gonna see that wage 10 years from now. Because it's so politically just unfathomable to raise them. The public doesn't like it. You don't like to do it as a board member, and that's why it hasn't been done in 13 years.
Well, I hear you, but.
At the end of the day.
But here's what, let's just, I guess, I want to stay away from numbers until somebody
No, I get
breaks that ice. But here's one of the issues I
You
have.
sound like you have a spud in your hand, though.
Well, I have numbers. I mean, I'll be honest.
Well, I'll tell you what, and I sort of put my logic, right? I think it's $9,500. I think that if you did 65, that would be fine. Now, I also said 65, and Ken wanted to do a two-tiered thing, so 65, and I think he had 75. The next people that, at the election, that was the two-tier. But quite honestly, if you take the 10,000 and add it on as trustee work, that would make them 65, and whether you want to do a two-tier or not, that's up to you. But I think at a minimum, this job should pay 65.
I guess
Well,
In all
Go ahead,
honesty,
Frank, you have a
just,
I just had some numbers and I'll throw
Yeah.
them out there. What kind of I've been thinking about is I would prefer to see the position, the raise or the increase in that position take effect, let's say November 1st of 2016. So right before the election, that new board comes in, those are the rates that are set. that way it takes the politics out of any of the three officials being seen as raising their own rate. It's open to election, people can elect whoever they want. Secondly, I don't think the trustee value, I think that it's more than sufficient today. I don't see an increase necessary there, it's my own opinion.
Right.
The numbers that I think I was looking at was 65,000 for the supervisor, 62,000 for the other two full-time positions.
To be effective in November of next year.
November of next year.
That's a 20% increase.
Don't get
But
hung
keep
up
in
on
mind-
percentages.
No,
You gotta
but
look
it's-
over,
But
you
it's
gotta
a
look over
20%
time.
increase over how many years?
But keep in mind, in 2008,
Over how many years?
2008, there's supposed to be,
Listen to what I'm saying? It's a
Right.
20% increase over how many years?
14.
Right.
Right.
But that 62,000 represents what our salaries, actually it's a little less, if you take the 2% from 2008 till now, that salary's less than what the board in 2008 had previously voted on. That's already been previously voted. I'm just throwing that out. That should be the salary today, which is reasonable, had we done it,
Right.
you know, over time, and I mentioned that to the board.
Is it like 18% or
No,
something?
you're close.
Close.
So so now that we're throwing out numbers, I was thinking something along the lines of, I mean, that's 20%. Interestingly enough, I came up with 20%. And what I was thinking was that you would take 20% over 3 years. And when you do that, you end up with like a 6.6%. I hear what Mr. York's comment is, but you end up with a 6.6% adjustment over 3 years. That gets you to about those numbers. I mean, 66 and, 66 and 70 or something like that. 6.6 a
But the
year.
macro
Oh,
adjustment's more than 3 years.
Pardon me?
But the macro adjustment's more than 3 years.
Yeah,
So
the
it's
period, the time frame goes back to
probably-
'01, when you go from.
I'm
Probably
just-
more like 3%.
I understand that, but if I'm sitting out in a resident that hasn't heard all of this, right? And I read that there's a 20% adjustment, that happens in year one. I'll be frank with you, I'm looking at that as a 20% adjustment. I'm not saying, well, it goes back, and, well, I get all that. So that's why so we're starting to throw around numbers. My thought process was, when I took 2010 through 2018 and said 2% a year, right? That took the supervisor from 58 to 68. It took the clerk from 55 to 60, 64 something, so around 65, and the same thing for the treasurer. Then I took those averages of the other communities without the three larger, and it was a little higher. It was 74 for the supervisor, and 68 for the clerk, and 68 for the trustee, for the treasurer. And all I did was sort of split that. And when I did the math, I came up with 20% and did it over 3 years. I don't know. So now I'm sitting out as a resident saying, all right, haven't had a raise in 15 or whatever it is. We're going to make a 3 year, a process over 3 years. It's 20%. That's 6 point something a year. I don't know. I'm going, these jobs are worth more than they get paid today. I definitely believe that. I mean, $58,000 a year is $26 an hour. That's we're paying $26 an hour for someone to run the community. So I think that's not enough.
The assistant library director makes 25.
Absolutely. Assistant library, and I know we can't and I get
Yeah,
that.
can't
So
compare.
I support an increase. I'm just saying, I'm trying to think of, a way to do it that's more palatable.
Right.
And I think the election date should be the date where whatever that final number we think is appropriate is should go into effect, because of that nature, that desire to be, as a board member, to not address the question. It's the easy thing to do, is to say, we're just not gonna do it. I don't have to talk about it.
So when we keep saying that, I don't understand this. So are we saying that no matter what we say tonight about 3 years, then maybe I just don't understand the process well enough. So we say that we're gonna make an adjustment over 3 years. And at these dates, these are the pays that are effective. So that still becomes and I don't wanna be naive, but that still becomes an issue at that. So next
You
year.
have to take a second vote every year to
You do?
do that
Okay.
raise.
I didn't-
That's
I didn't-
where the issue
You have to
is.
approve the budget Every year, and,
So you
and
have
then
to-
when you approve the budget, there's a number that says the increase of wages, just based on the way that
Right.
Harrison Township has done it in the past, it lists the percentage increase every year. And I can tell you, just from the board that left in '08
Yeah.
and the board that was incoming, it was unpalatable to say, yeah, we're gonna take that 2%.
Okay.
Especially
I hear
around
you.
'09, '10, things started to reach that point.
Well-
I would not have been comfortable coming here 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14 and having this
So
discussion.
quite frankly, if we had an economic disaster next year, then that might occur. So there could be a
Correct.
reason, there could be a reason
Yeah, absolutely.
under which it would be, not recommended. I mean, I don't know.
That's part of my point is that in 2008, we did something reasonable, right? 2% a year. But then the board came in and whatever, economic reasons,
We'll just
whatever,
have to make sure
doesn't,
reasonable people get elected.
it doesn't matter that you don't do
And
that.
compensation's part of
right?
that factor.
Right? Because
Yeah.
right now,
It is, because when you look at what we had when you have an unattractive salary, you get an employee that works at a different business
No.
and gets recalled, or you get somebody that's a retiree that they treat it as a part-time job, or you get somebody that doesn't have the skill set to manage money,
No,
checks,
I agree.
employees, $17 million budget. I don't want somebody to go, wow,
No, I agree.
this is a ton of money
We
for
need
this
to make it
job. You know
an
what I mean?
amount
And it
that's.
is.
But we can't also cure the ills of the past
No,
15 years.
absolutely not.
So I think that we need to take a graduated approach, you know, and
And I agree with that, but I think that election year has to be the cliff.
Okay.
You know,
that's why they did it in '08, because it took effect the day of the election or whatever that,
November 20th at noon.
whatever that was.
And that's why I picked hard numbers as opposed to a graduation, to say.
well, I think there still are hard numbers. There's a hard, but Frank, I hear what you're saying, but according to what these gentlemen are saying, if we pick a number that's in November of next year, it still has to be approved when the budget's approved. No different.
No, you make that,
No,
because
no.
yeah, this is
The
important.
election year is different.
Yeah, you establish, by its
Yeah.
by its definition, this board has to establish the salaries that board members run for prior to that election. So you can't say, we're gonna have election, and everybody takes office November 20th, 2016. What's the pay? We'll let you know when we get there. By law, before that election comes, we have to declare what the salary of all 3 or 4 positions pays. That's a matter of fact.
And you cannot lower the rate that somebody ran for.
Right. You can voluntarily
So-
agree to, so if
so-
you're using your economic disaster proposal,
Yeah.
if we said, well, we believe we've corrected what I perceive to be an inequity in the salaries, and 2 years into the next term, an economic downturn results that we ask all employees to take a 5% wage cut. By law, the board cannot impose a 5% wage cut on the elected officials.
Right.
However, each elected official can voluntarily take a 5% wage cut. But Michigan law prohibits lowering a salary to anything less than what the salary was advertised for when the position
So
was put on
we
the
could
ballot.
still use, I'm not trying to say my example is the only one, but we could still use that example and say that at election time of next year, it is whatever that second year rung is. Do you see what I'm saying? So we say it's going to be whatever it is per year.
Well,
And
I think that was part of the argument in 2008, was that they said the position was advertised at this rate in, I think they foregone raise or something. They said, now we want an adjustment. We want it now, because we were paid what we were supposed to.
That was
pay."
actually in '04, that leading up to '08, and that was
Right.
really a different, I think, really a discussion.
It was a
that-
weird thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Yeah, it
doesn't
was
impact this. That was a group of trustees that said, we think we were offered more money, and so we vote
Right.
ourselves a lump sum
The
payment as we
adjustment.
leave.
As we leave,
Office.
And our attorney said that was,
Questionable.
But
no, he said that was fine, because I will assure you, I was withholding the checks because I didn't think that it was proper, but I was told to release them.
But my point is that I don't think we're having that kind of a discussion here. I'm not,
Yeah.
we're not trying to count to 4.
Right.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to have open discussion on a subject that's uncomfortable. And by its very nature, it's no more comfortable for the public than it is for us.
Yes, it is.
Well, let's say this. I know that I was at a meeting with a group of residents, And someone brought up the subject of wages for firefighters, and someone said, you know, you can't pay those guys enough. And I said, yeah, there's definitely days when you'd say, wow, this, you know, we could recant stories of some of the experiences that they went through. But the reality is, there is some number that's the appropriate number. You have to look at what the comparables are. So when we went into arbitration before a state arbitrator to talk about wages and benefits for our firefighters, one of the big ones is comparables. You literally look, well, what does this community have? Pick a list of communities that are comparable to your community, and many of these were on that list of comparables. They were literally the communities that were used to take a look at our wages. And what are they paying? Yeah, there's some days when you couldn't get paid enough. That isn't true for just firefighters. That's true for kindergarten teachers. It's true for everybody. But there's a finite amount of money that you can pay a kindergarten teacher. Before you'd say everyone else is teaching kindergarten at a lower rate, this pay is too great. But truly, there are days that are tough. It goes for almost all jobs. But at some point, there's a right amount. And at a bare minimum, I'm trying to get this board to understand that where we are currently is not the right amount. I can't find comparables for our salaries for the 3 elected officials and their deputies in any of the comparable communities.
You know where you find these positions at that rate is where you have part-time people that don't put in.
Or, you know, up north or something.
the
Largely rural
expectation-
communities that don't have unions, don't have employees, have volunteer fire departments, have a different, have a completely different
Right.
style of living. Where, you know, when we talk about 1,240 townships, we're talking about the vast majority of those are rural communities. Many of those have an extremely, radically lower salary than these. But the point is that there is no gradual decline when you look at the data for MTA, for the Michigan Townships Association. There's 2 types of townships. There's rural townships in the middle of nowhere where they meet in somebody's, you know, I mean, I've literally met supervisors that say we take turns having meetings at each other's kitchen table. But they in some cases they meet twice a year or once a year. Or, you know, their biggest concern is managing, a cemetery. You know, that's their budget. So you can't compare what we do and the level of services that we provide to those communities. It makes it difficult to find comparables.
I think at a minimum, you should at least adjust them to what the 2008 board said as a minimum, to be quite honest. The 2% per year. I mean, that was reasonable back then, and you know, that's what we had decided.
Cumulative
No.
or just 2% flat?
No, I think cumulative, that you should, because that was what the board did. They wanted to gradually increase them, so there wouldn't be, so now we sit, so here's the politics of it, right? You're over there shaking your head no, right?
No,
In
I
2008,
don't
in 2008,
understand because
in two-
conditions were different back then.
No,
So
in
to say
2008
that we should get 2% of cumulative back in 2008, to me, doesn't make any sense.
Okay, well, the conditions weren't any different from 2004 to 2008. Let's take a look at that period.
Well,
2004 to 2008, I entered in here with Adam and Ken and Tony, or not Ken, but Tony and everybody. We had a budget deficit. Treasurer's office was just structurally deficient. I had 18 accounts. It was a mess. We come in, the board takes a very conservative approach. By the time you get 2008, we have a balanced budget. We have reduced our staffing to levels that we have today. When I came into office, I got rid of 2 people out of my office to save the township money. That work had to be absorbed. Supervisor's office, they got rid of some building department people. We changed from having inspectors to part-time inspectors because there wasn't enough, you know, the
Reduce
permits
water
were
and
down.
sewer
Right,
personnel
right.
by 1.
But when we left in 2008, there were $3 million in the general fund. We came in, there was what, $200,000 in the general fund? We left with $3.1 million that board in 2008. Now, you know, based on that performance, there should have been a bigger raise than $2,500, just based on performance itself. And we still have that that in the general fund at least, we still have that balance moving forward, you know, of $2.6 million. But that occurred because people did a lot of work and absorbed a lot of jobs.
And we've
in
eliminated some
that
since
process. And I understand the public, this is a hard thing, but that's just a simple fact. We've gone from 50 employees in 2004 to what, 38, 37? Everybody's taking on more. And we'll even go into, you know, I'll just take my office, and I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but that's just the way it is. You know, this DDA, who do you think does all the work on that? You know, there's a lot of paperwork that gets done on that. Nobody comes to me and says, hey, Darren, we're going to give you $2,000 or $3,000. But if it's the, you know, somebody, a union employee taking on some work, and I won't, you know, in the last contract, we paid them $8,000 to take on, you know, doing some additional work around here. But does somebody come and say, hey, we're going to be getting a service fee from the DDA of, you know, at some point we're going to have to discuss that, what the DDA is going to pay us to do that administration. Do I get any part of that? No. Do I get any part of the $110,000 that the fire department pays for us to do all the checks and all that? No. Do I get any part of the $110,000 or the clerk's office or supervisor's office, the administration from the water sewer department that we have to do with all the checks? And no, we don't. To do all the transfers, to manage that money. I don't get any extra money for that, and I never asked for it. Do we get money? We're doing the garbage administration,
Billing
right?
and-
We're getting $100,000 for that. Do we get a little kick to do that extra work? No. But I've never
Mr. Young.
asked for it. I'm
Mr. Young.
just pointing out,
Good facts.
I'm just pointing out that,
I've
that this board and other boards, if a union employee were to be taking on that work, we immediately say, yes, you should, you're doing that additional work and you get an extra whatever. In the last case, I believe it was $7,000 in the water sewer director's position. And I'm just, once again, pointing out, be consistent across all levels. But to say that there's not money there, there certainly is. Because we've been conservative in that general fund, and while I talk about the fire fund, you know, unfortunately, you have arbitrators at the same time that don't want to give you any money relief, which is, you know, sort of put us in a backup. But it doesn't matter what happens in the fire department, it's not going to affect the general fund.
Oh, now I have
You know,
to say something. How
that-
could
that's
that be
my
the
point.
case? If we're $200,000 short in the fire fund, where's the money gonna come from?
It has to come from a fire millage. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
We can talk about bolstering that fund in the short
Right.
term, and we've had this
Well-
discussion a zillion times. Hold on.
Okay.
We either have to reduce expenses, 85% of which is labor, or increase revenue.
Right.
That's the only way we're gonna solve the fire budget.
Understood.
We've been talking about that for since I came on this board in 08, late 08.
But if the fund's short in November, where's the money come from? If it's short in November, where does it come from?
It either comes from reduced spending, in the short term.
In the short term.
In short term, it has to be in the form of some sort of a loan from the general fund.
All right, but we don't have to, I get that, but,
Right, but even
But
like
the
the-
solution isn't to say, well, the general fund has to dwindle down to zero and then we
well,
address it.
we don't agree on that 100%. Right. Absolutely.
But the fire fund, even when the fire fund was rich, there was a time when the fire fund,
At seven
the
or-
general fund was here and the fire fund had
Agreed.
$3 million. The ASME union tried to say, hey, we should take some of that fire money, but, you know, it just doesn't work that way. They're two different
I
funds.
don't think this is about the fund balance. I mean, I don't think any of us are talking about the fund balance. I think most of us are saying that we're in line with some kind of adjustment, most of us. I don't want to speak for anybody else on
And
the board.
the way I looked at it as far as numbers, because that's sort of where the end of the conversation is the 2% number is reasonable in the short term. If you were to do that, let's say you did it immediately, you're talking $900 this year for the 3 full-time officials, give or take $1 here or there. If you do it again in the start of the calendar year, for an annual basis, it's just $6,700. So a total cost before, you know, for the rest of the term, roughly $7,500
For all three.
for all
No.
three. over the total.
I'm losing it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't.
I'm trying to put a number on the cost.
Right,
That we're
but,
talking.
but that's per person.
No, total.
No, total.
Total.
So
That's
if you-
what, that's the total we're talking about if we said, you know what, starting next pay period, you're gonna, the 3 full-time officials, and this is just talking point. If we said 2% based on that prior board action, and so it's really 1% for the rest of the year, you know,
You mean
off the annual.
you mean a 2%?
Right now, so we went from 55 to 56,100.
Oh, I didn't know that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So it's a cost, this
No,
year
I
it's-
get that.
You know what I mean,
All
it's
right, I didn't
$900
understand
this
what you
year.
were saying.
Over
Okay.
next year, it's $6,600.
Another 2% next year.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not talking about anything that balances the budget.
No, I agree with it. I didn't, but quite frankly, I wasn't aware that those were the numbers we were talking about. Because when we start looking at these averages, I don't think anybody was.
Yeah, I
No,
thought you were
but I'm
talking
saying,
something a little bigger.
I'm saying,
Right.
short term, it is unreasonable, and I think that's what I'm hearing from trustees, is that to do anything short term that puts us anywhere close to on par is unreasonable.
Well, I'm
It
gonna
could be-
tell you, for 2%, I'm not taking the political hit for 2%. That is,
But let's say this, if it was 2%, long-term, that really doesn't correct the
Right.
deficit.
It would take,
Right,
that's what I'm
right.
saying, it would take a long, and that's why I think the number at the election is the number
No,
that needs
but
to
I
be the
almost
change.
agree with Derek that it's not worth all the debate over 2%.
yeah.
I mean,
it's
I
not
didn't think
even
we
for
were talking about.
$900, keep
No,
it.
I'm
That's
putting
good.
it
But
in,
it's,
in
it,
perspective.
That's what got
you can't look at it
these
as a
positions
political
where we're
hit.
at.
Right.
That's not
right.
what we're trying to do. We're trying to adjust these positions for positions. We're not trying to
Well, that's
get
my
somebody
point.
elected
Make it
or
a-
not elected.
Right, we wanna
That's
make it
my
a
point. If
fair.
you're gonna adjust them,
period.
just adjust them and be done with it. That's my point.
Right.
Every time you say you're gonna do it next year and the year after, there's always another reason why you don't.
Like, I'm not gonna take the political hit for $900.
Correct,
There you go.
correct, and I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I
That's
mean,
wrong. That's what I'm
That's
saying
wrong.
is wrong.
The solution,
The solution
What was
is
wrong
the
was not
position.
just doing the 2%, which was agreed before.
Well, can we, hey, can I
You know-
make a suggestion? Can we talk about some targets that we all might agree on? I mean, I don't know, maybe it's too hard to do that without talking about over a period of time.
it would be reasonable to say, what should the clerk and treasurer's
Yes.
number be
Can't we-
today? All
can't-
other things being
can't we
equal,
at
you had a
least
blank
say
sheet of
that?
paper.
Yeah, what should it be?
Ignoring all other
Yes.
factors, if you
What would
said
it
we're
be?
starting a brand-new township, it's gonna be 26,000 residents, 14.5 square miles, what should that number be?
Okay, so I'll ask a question.
I mean, you throw
You're
a
a
number.
finance guy, right?
No, I'm not. I'm a
Okay.
bank operations guy, but go ahead.
If, you know,
Yes.
supervisors really like, I hate to use the word CEO, but that's just
Right,
what really a comparable position would be, right?
right.
You know, what would you pay for that based on?
I can tell
A
you.
position like mine, right? The person, a treasurer who,
irrelevant.
you know, we deal with $45 million. I think it is relevant.
It's not.
No, what qualifications do we have to pull numbers out of the air?
See, the numbers I was trying to come up with, Darren, were based on what we
Oh,
have.
I agree.
What
Yeah.
we have today, what other people make, what would have happened over years if we gave a 2% increase. That's where I was trying to go.
Well, that's where I was at too. I was saying, I keep going back to 2008.
You know,
And just because I simply believe, and I firmly believe, that you have to do just one thing, adjust them and be done with
If
it. And
somebody-
I will say, and maybe I eat my words, but I would bet any amount of money that 10 years from now, whatever the salary is, if it ever gets adjusted, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but let's just say you adjusted it to $70,000.
right, let's say you did
Right?
that.
Just throwing that out. 10 years from now, it's gonna probably be $70,000 because that's the experience in this township is that you always have another reason why you don't do even just a 2% or even a 1% raise.
Right.
So
And
we're
our
gonna-
goal isn't.
That's my point.
But our goal isn't to make sure the person in 10 years is getting paid the right amount. It's current, we have to worry about current, you know what I mean?
See, it's,
I'm
it's
trying
so,
not to
it's,
I'm trying to take the,
No, I know, but
so so if we had some target amount, then maybe we could move the discussion to, over what period of time. I know the public wants to have, some comments, but I think it's hard to comment unless we put something out there that,
Right.
that they can comment about,
Yep.
right?
Well,
That's all.
I can tell you that the clerk and treasurer's position at 70,000 would still be below the average across the state and less than everyone in Macomb County. So, I'm just gonna say, to me, that number is not, that's not, again, it's less than the average, and it's less than anyone else in Macomb County.
And then, so let me ask you one other, let me ask you one other question. How would you get to that number? Over what period of time would you get to that number?
Well, that's certainly a part of that, that's a part of the issue. That's part of the reason why this is
I think it's
listed as a
absolutely part of the
discussion.
issue.
Right. And what I'm hearing is that this board sees value in doing that over time. I don't have a problem with that. As I say, I understand this is an unpalatable conversation for everybody involved. But there needs to be a target. I think that's a reasonable way to move forward on this. How you get there, whether it's over a multi-year period, we can talk about that. But what we run into, one of the complications for that is, this board can talk about salaries between now and November 2016. We are not empowered to address salaries beyond 2026.
So if we made it over a 3-year period, we could at least cover 2 of them, and
Correct.
1 more would left to be done. So I don't see that as a limiting factor.
And
That's all I'm saying.
And here's like the way I'm thinking. We have to set the end number. Let's say over your 3-year argument. You're saying beginning of 2017. I'm saying move it a month forward, so it's the start of the election. So those people know exactly the number is when they walk in. It's a month. You know what I mean? It's a month difference.
Well, I actually wasn't saying the beginning. The numbers I had computed was like middle of the year, just to minimize the impact. But, you know, I wouldn't quibble over a few months. If we could agree on a target and a period of time, I'm not gonna quibble on a few months.
Right. And if you look, and in my head,
Because a raise at the end of the year doesn't affect that year at all.
and when I look at the spreadsheet and taking into account some of the communities in Macomb County that are maybe have a larger population or different square miles, and I understand that that's a reasonable concern. But if you look at the other communities that were pulled in here that are more similar in population or taxable value, I think the number is closer to 65 for clerk and treasurer, and then I tried to do the math as to what the differential is. It's like 68, 890 for supervisor. You can call it 68, 900.
I'll make this easy. You put that motion out there over 3 years, and I let's hear from the, a 3 year, three years with those numbers.
But I
Or
don't.
3 times. And let's see what happens. I think we're at a point where we gotta make,
We have to decide on 2 sides of the equation.
okay,
One is the end point,
right.
and the second is how you do that. Is it an equal amount annually?
I say
Is it- you know what I
equal
mean?
amounts in three, let's move it along. Equal amounts in 3 times, whether that's today, in March, and in November, in December next year, whatever. But let's put something out there that these folks who are waiting patiently can say something about.
Public comment first.
Well, we're just, well,
Of course, you can't do that.
How about, yeah, hold on a second. Let me clarify. What, please. The process is that the board deliberates before the board votes, but after there's a motion, we take public comment. And believe me, if there is a motion, we'll accept public comment.
I'll make a motion to table this agenda item.
All right. Until when? Until the next meeting? That's a table.
No,
All right, we've
Table's
got
next
a,
meeting.
I understand. We got
I
a
will
motion
make-
by Mr. Tominello to table the
to
discussion.
next meeting, so we can hear public comment.
Is there support for the motion?
Support.
A motion by Mr. Tominello, a support by Mr. Brado.
So the public comment is limited to whether or not we should table this?
Yeah.
Because, no, I mean, that's
That's the
when
whole
you make a
point.
motion, that's, it's.
I know.
Normally,
but-
when we table,
we
we've
just-
never held anybody to talk about the motion alone. So don't start tonight.
Yeah, we do. You
No,
gotta,
you don't. Because if that's the case, then we would not have the public comment and the rebuttal that you.
I'm asking for
Bring
clarity. I
back.
wasn't trying to,
Okay.
I was asking.
I'm
I'm willing to
saying-
listen to public comment regardless, so let's just listen to public comment,
no
please.
problem.
William Bardell, what I'd like to say is, I'm not for a race to the bottom. All I'm saying is something reasonable. I give Mr. Tominello 1%, Mr. York 1%, Mr. Brado 1%, everyone else, you take 3% back. It's my opinion. These guys do your work. You have deputies. They do your work. You got a gravy job for $55,000 a year. Shit, man, I have a party. If you don't drink too much or gamble too much or have too many girlfriends, you could live high on the hog on that. You got total package. That's great money. Try that in the public sector. If you don't got a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, not mechanical tech engineering, mechanical engineering, you're not an underwater welder, I wouldn't give you 60,000. I don't care about the basket weaving. I could care less. You all get 3%, boom. That's it. 3%, and that's it. For you and your deputies. Be done with it. Each get 3%, that's it. No more raises. 3% now, forever on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura Roman, resident. When I was listening to all this, as I'm sitting back here listening to this, thinking, you are talking to a whole room of people who haven't had raises in 8 years or looking for jobs. But now that's not where I'm coming at you. What I'm listening to is my children standing in front of me going, I want more money. My kids looking at me saying, I want more allowance. And if they're going to stand there and go, well, they have a bigger house, they're getting paid more. Well, they do more chores than me, they should have more. That's what I'm hearing based on how the argument's starting out. If there truly is money that's being saved, then that's where I think you should be going with. If there's money saved and it's there, but what to come back around and then you're going to be looking at us next year for a millage to support raises that there's no money for, because if we are looking at a position where we are still trying to get out of things, then we're not in a position to look for raises. Defend the work you're doing, if you are doing work. You know, if you're, I really heard a statement that made sense. Somebody said something about there's meetings over and above your full-time 40 hours. If you're working 40 hours a week and you are doing extra meetings, there you go, put a stipend in for those extra meetings. That's fair. I mean, if you're putting in full-time work in 40 hours, and I hear all kinds of rumors that it isn't a 40-hour position, but just to compare and go to other communities and say, I need more because they get more. That's the argument of the world. That's where we are in the deficit we are with welfare and everything else, because people want more for what they're doing. But like I said, if it's because there's cuts and costs and then there's money, then you have more you can do stuff with. Other than that, you're putting all of us to make it up for you guys next year with us still not getting raises. So,
Thank you.
Claire Fackler, resident. I'm not going to give you my address anymore. I'm tired. Time for bed.
You look tired.
I've been up since 4. All right, you've wasted an hour of my time. Fighting like a little bunch of kindergartners. Nobody wants to make any decisions. Tell you what, yes, you deserve a raise, but not until you grow some cojones and quit letting the damn unions run roughshod over you and they get all their buckies and you get squat. And this is coming from a union wife. You let the unions run roughshod over you. If you don't have the cojones, you get bupkis.
Uh-oh,
Like that.
uh-oh. Like what now?
You ready, Darren?
I am now, like with Blake.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Randy LaForest. Personally, I don't think you really need a raise. You knew what it was going in, and yes, it's been years. But you know what? People on Social Security, they're lucky if they get 1%. Maybe. And there was lots of years there was nothing. And this township is made up of a lot of retirees. You're going to want more money. The fire department, they were doing great until we got another chief and you guys started going nuts, buying stuff and replacing stuff and whatever. And now you've got to help them out of the general fund. You also want to buy Jefferson School, which is full of asbestos and all that. Money, money, money. Who are you going to come after? Take that off the table. There's your raise. Also, I have no clue, but I would like to know, how many vacation days or how many days do you get off a year paid? Is it 2 weeks a year for the full-timers or the deputies? I mean, is it more than that? Because normally, you don't get up to 4, 5, 6 weeks until you're somewhere for 10, 15, 20 years. And it just, I'm with Mr. Tominello. It just, at this time, is not the time. Either that or put it on the ballot for the following. Give yourself 0.5%, 1%, and then put it on the ballot and let the people who employ you tell you yes or no. And if you do not like the money that you're paid, then don't run again and let somebody else that is willing to do the job for that money and be here do it. I mean, nobody's forcing you to run for these jobs. When you're in an election, there's always somebody right there with you wanting the job. So it's appreciated. Don't get me wrong. What you do is appreciated. But at this time and everything with your dreams of the downtown and Jefferson School and funding the fire department and giving the unions their raises and the firefighters and all that, we just plainly can't afford you. And there is no way we would ever run our houses the way you are planning on running this, because you're planning on using money that you don't even have for expenditures. $13,000 on flowers, school, there's just so much. And it's got to stop. You've got to put the brakes on. We're a bedroom community built up. We're not getting in the big houses anymore where you can get the revenue. You're going to have to live within your means, just like everybody that has a paycheck comes in every week has to live within their means, or somebody's going to come take their house and they'll be out on the street. I'm not saying that you don't deserve it. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying at this time, it's a bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would like to make just one comment.
Well, we'll close the floor for
I'm
public
sorry.
comment. And I'd like to answer some
Can I
of the
just
comments,
ask
but go
just one
ahead.
comment and then you can have it and I'm just
Sure,
gonna
go
be
ahead.
quiet?
Sure.
All right. So let's just be clear on one item. So I'll use your thing. I'll have some cojones. Okay?
Oh, you're talking clear.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew you.
So you were in my office this morning at 10 o'clock. We were discussing this issue, right? You had stopped by, right?
I got in the afternoon.
So the simple fact is, just so everybody knows, we don't collect the tax dollars for the general fund. Right? So on your tax bill, you have $0 for general fund. That means $0 from your taxes go to pay really the treasurer's office staff and the water sewer's its own fund. You pay that through the water bill, so all those salaries. But these salaries here, $0 of taxes pay these salaries. Let's just be really clear.
Well, $0 of property tax.
Yeah, but you know, so when you say taxes, we get money from the state, revenue sharing from the state, which we use to pay most of the salaries in the general fund. The AFSCME, the bus drivers get paid out of that. Some of it is the smart money for the bus drivers. But $0 of taxes, people, pay for these jobs and most of the AFSCME jobs.
Property taxes.
Right, so
Property
to address
Comes
that,
from the state, it's still taxed.
I agree,
Absolutely.
and we can argue that, but
so to expand on that notion, probably about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, we were collecting approximately 0.35 mils of property tax to fund the township. as property values, as our taxable value has dropped, the amount, the actual dollar amount that we're paying for anything that's property tax funded has gone down. So as an example, in, I think it was '09 or '10, was our high water year, 5 mills generated a certain amount of revenue for fire services. Since that time, all of our property values, our taxable values have dropped. Now we have the voters voted for a half mil of additional millage for the fire department, and we took the .4 mils that was being used for the general fund. We eliminated that from the general fund and put that into the fire fund. So now our tax rate is 5.54 mils. It's an 11% increase in the tax rate that we pay. But because our property taxes dropped so rapidly and are capped to come back at the rate of inflation, regardless of what your property value is, your taxable value is capped, 5.54 mils of revenue for fire services generates 11% less in sheer dollars, not adjusted for inflation. It's 11% less than what we had with only 5 mils back in 2009. So we've taken revenue from the general fund in the form of a millage. We've made cuts at the general fund, within the general fund. We also lost statutory revenue sharing. We used to receive $600,000 in statutory revenue sharing from the state of Michigan. In the short term, we had a cut in constitutional revenue sharing. Both of those are driven by sales taxes. So when sales taxes dropped because people were not spending, they didn't have the money to spend, we saw both of those go away. That $600,000 has returned to the level of $65,000. And the constitutional revenue sharing has seen a pretty steady increase every year. But those are the dollars that fund the general fund. So we've experienced $700,000 in cuts to the general fund from just 2 funds that we've made cuts to close the gaps on. So when someone said, you know, your taxes need to pay for it, right now our property taxes are not paying the bill for the general fund. You know, address the union contracts. We have 3 employee bargaining units: the firefighters, AFSCME, which is the majority of the general employees, and then about 5 employees that are on a supervisory union. All 3 of those have gone through at least 2 concessionary, if not 3 concessionary contracts. The firefighters have not had an increase since, I'm not really sure, probably.
I believe it was 11.
Well, I think it was before that, because I was not supervisor, but I was a trustee. It was either
We
'09.
had lost an arbitration
Right.
on the thing for 8, 9, and 10.
It could be, I think it's, I don't know if it went into 10, but somewhere in that
It
range.
was 8, 9, and 10.
Okay. Since then, they've had 2 rounds of concessions, the firefighters have. AFSCME and the supervisory union have had either 2 or 3 rounds of concessions. So in terms of addressing the union contracts, our employees have definitely come to the table to address some of those things. In the most recent supervisory and AFSCME contract, there was a switch to an increase in some of the benefits, primarily a signing bonus for AFSCME and some small increases on supervisory. It's important to understand that while we can negotiate with all 3 unions, the fire department has what's called binding arbitration. They cannot strike. Public safety workers in Michigan have special protections. So if we can't come to an agreement, we have to go to a third party, make an argument. The 3 full-timers spent the better part of last year in arbitration with the firefighters, working to address all the comparables, collecting data, going to hearings, and doing after spending almost a year in negotiations with the firefighters to try to address those contracts without having to go through arbitration. The new chief's not buying stuff. We bought an ambulance that went out of service well after the one that we had in place needed to be replaced. Someone mentioned we need to put this on the ballot. By law, we can't. Unfortunately, in about 9 or 10, there was a ruling that said if there's something that a governing body, if the Board of Trustees, for example, have the ability to vote on planting a tree, I can't put planting a tree on the ballot. We have to make that decision ourselves. So the days of a referendum on the ballot are gone by law. The last time we were able to put a referendum on is when we went to a single waste hauler. That was a referendum vote. But since then, by law, even if we wanted to say here's a proposed salary, we'd like you to vote on it, we're prohibited by law from doing that. Because, quite frankly, there's some of those ideas that come up and you say, that would be really a good way to be able to do it. Let someone else run. It's true, but if there's a structural issue here, the structural issue continues. We cannot find comparables for the salary that we're making. The issue that we have before us, we can table it. There's a motion on the floor here, and we'll vote soon on tabling it. Tabling it doesn't solve it, it prolongs it. It doesn't solve the problem. There's only 7 people that can solve this problem. I haven't heard someone here say the salaries are out of whack or that there isn't a problem. We can table it. I think it's a mistake. I think this board needs to address the problem. We are the only ones empowered, and we have been the only ones since 2001. Our predecessors have been the only ones, and we are the only ones that can address this. We can talk about doing it in steps. We can talk about target numbers. But doing nothing, I think, is a failure on the part of this board. Are there any other board comments?
Why don't we just get rid of it altogether? I mean, this is what happens, you never,
Well,
just the nature of it, and I'm done talking,
okay, well, we've got a motion by, is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello, a support by Mr. Brado to table the subject to a future meeting?
You know, just a point of clarification, when you table something, you have to define a date for it to return.
Correct.
Yes, you do. That's proper procedure. You can,
Okay,
You
but
can-
hold on.
proper procedure for tabling is to define a date for it to return. If you don't want to if you want it to never come back, but you don't need to vote to table it. We can say we discussed it and we move on.
well, anybody can bring it back.
I thought I
Right.
said next meeting was fine.
Yeah, he said
But what's
next
the,
meeting,
and
yeah.
what's the point of tabling it till next meeting when we're just gonna have the same discussion for an
'Cause
hour again?
I don't think we're gonna come to a resolution.
But the only way we can come to a resolution is by having a frank and honest discussion in a
Deliberation.
public forum
Right.
and deliberate it here in front of residents. I think if we say, you know what, we're not gonna do it tonight, and then these people have already spent.
You can vote no.
That's on tabling it, I think that's disingenuous. We put it on an agenda and said we were gonna talk about it today and say, oh, we're gonna talk about it again. Somebody that's here and said, I'm gonna sit around and comment on this, maybe they're not here next meeting and they don't have the opportunity to come and comment on it. I think kicking it down the can doesn't solve anything. It makes it more difficult for people to speak on the agenda.
Well, let's just, let's
I didn't
just
think that we were
table it,
making
here,
a-
here, if I may. Why don't we just table it? Everybody can go home, they can think about it, they can call whoever they want, they can do some research on their own. And if it comes back to the next board meeting, and it's just, whatever, there's no direction, then we just get rid of it at that point.
So, I think that, you-
Because you just play Ring Around the Rosie.
a couple of
right?
things I'd like to say. There were some comments about our discussion here tonight. And I'll say for the record, I think this was a very frank and honest discussion.
Yeah, I don't feel
on
like
a
we're
very
arguing.
difficult subject.
Right.
And one of the things that I've learned since coming to this type of government, I mean, I worked in private industry. When you had a problem, you went in a conference room and you fought it out in private, right? You didn't have to go in public and have these conversations. And quite frankly, I thought it was a better way to do business because you didn't have to air all your dirty laundry. Well, what you're hearing tonight, I think this is very important. We can't talk about this in private, so we're talking about it now. So if it sounds like we're bantering and it's because we are. It's because that's what we're here to do. This is a working session where we're trying to work on a very difficult problem. I think that's important to have understood.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
yeah.
Fair point.
Right.
And so, I apologize if anybody thinks that this is the
Yeah,
way
this
it works.
isn't personal,
This
I'm
is-
not, yeah.
I'd rather have done it in a conference room, personally, but
Right.
we can't. So,
And it's good that we can't, but the
it
point is that
or
when you
people
come
wouldn't
from.
get to hear what we're saying right now.
Right, right.
But, originally I was opposed to tabling it as well. But I will tell you this, it's a very emotional subject. Maybe what we need to do is reflect on it for a couple of weeks and come back.
fine.
And under those circumstances, I think a lot has been said. We've gotten comments from the public. So maybe we just take a break. It doesn't mean it's not gonna come back. We take a break, we put it on the agenda for next week and we start, that's all.
Is 2
Or
weeks
2 weeks,
sufficient?
That's
I mean,
fine.
is there
Let's just
research
do it
that
2
others?
weeks and be
Ah,
done.
Yeah,
From
hold
my
on, hold on.
perspective here, it does say I'm requesting that the Board of Trustees begin a discussion. So I didn't get the impression that we were gonna complete this tonight, so.
All right.
That's fine, let's
Right,
bring it back
so
at
I'm
the next
okay with
board
tabling.
meeting,
I
take
get
a
it,
cooling
but-
off period, whatever
But if there's
happens,
nothing
happens.
new in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, why'd we wait?
Well,
And that's the
same thing
point.
happens with contract negotiations. I mean,
Well,
Can we
it
take
kinda
a vote
guess
to
what
takes
I'd like-
time.
Hold on.
Sorry.
What I'd like to see maybe next time is come back with some numbers, whether it's 6%, 4%, 5%,
right.
graduated over 2 years, 3 years. Put that on the question. Let's vote on
Right.
it.
Right,
I was-
and here's the problem with that. I originally tried that.
Right.
I originally tried that, and what I was met with was, no, let's just merge into
Yeah.
this.
But-
Because there's a discomfort for anyone to make that number or to set that bar until I can say to you that what I perceived on this issue, before I brought it forward, is not what I perceive now.
Right.
But the only reason why my perception on this is different is because of this deliberation.
Right.
For the next 2 weeks, we're not gonna deliberate. We're gonna sit down and we're gonna be exactly where we are right now. And so I'm not saying we can't table this, but there needs to be a goal for the reason for tabling it. Because tabling it says, well, let's not make a decision now and let's wait till later. That's fine, but what's gonna change? If you said, well, for example, if board members said, well, I need more data. I wanna do some research. I'd like to consult with MTA and I'd like to understand this better. I'd like to know what you do. I wanna follow you around all day. I need an accounting of all the things you did. I'd like to go through the budget and look at numbers. There's a reason to table. But if the reason to table is to stop the discussion, it's not productive. The only way we're gonna resolve this is through deliberation at an open meeting, sitting here like we are right now.
Well, this is what I would say. I think that we've had a lot of discussion, right? I think sometimes taking a cooling off period might help people. They can go back, they can reflect, they can do their own research, right? Sometimes we do that, we call other communities, whatever. Just table it till the next
I
meeting.
agree. I think it gives
and-
us time to absorb, Ken. I mean, I think we've heard comments, we've kicked things around. I have a different perspective than I had a couple hours ago. I see no reason why we can't take a 2-week break, absorb it, and come back again. It's a difficult subject.
Why 2 weeks?
Or, I mean, at the
What's
next
the hurry?
meeting.
I know, but I mean, why,
But what's the hurry, though? I mean,
that's what I mean, why 2 weeks? Why not 4 weeks?
Well, I don't,
I mean,
Fine.
I don't understand why this is an urgent
Well,
right now. We have to
I'm-
decide.
okay.
Just table it for 2 weeks.
because it's
If it
painful
doesn't
to
get done in
decide
2 weeks,
whenever
we're
you
just
do.
gonna be done with it either way, right? Right? I don't think, I don't wanna be having this discussion at every single meeting, quite
Agreed.
honestly, all right? Whether, I've been 11 years at the same site, it is what it is at this point, right? So,
And just so the board is aware, I have a scheduled vacation that week. I will not be in town. I will be ineligible.
Well, I think-
ineligible
well,
to
this
participate in the
decision, to be quite honest, is really up to the trustees.
Yeah,
Like
but we
Rob
need to-
Garvin used to say, there's 4 trustees and three full-timers for a reason. Because those 4 people do the check on the 3 full-timers. That's why it's
but
a
I
4
think
to
it's
3
too
vote.
important a subject to schedule
I-
for discussion when we're not all here. I think everybody has to be
agree.
here. So I would be in favor of tabling.
I'll amend my motion if you wanna go meeting of, what would be August,
The end meeting.
Do you
in
wanna
August.
do a workshop?
I don't see the purpose of a workshop.
All right, that's
Yeah,
fine.
there's nothing different in here. There's no.
Is there
nothing
some
changes.
data that we can bring? Is there something that, you know,
give your calendar.
Something
for
different that
meeting in
people
2
are
weeks.
looking for,
What's
or-
the date?
It'd be it's either the 10th or the 24th, so
Well, if
we're
Adam can't
proposing
be
the
here on the
24th.
10th.
Yeah, it says that here in the next meeting, so it'll
Correct.
be the 24th.
Correct.
Right.
So, I mean, so I would surely, amend my motion to table to the meeting of the 24th. If,
I'll continue to
that
support
way
that.
everyone should be here.
Right.
All right.
And I just want to ask a question of the board members, is that, and I think Mr. York asked this question, is there something else, we as full-time officials have more time to dedicate to certain things than you as trustees do? You have jobs outside of here. Is there something that that you need to have this discussion continue in a fruitful manner so we can come to a conclusion? If we come to the meeting on the 24th and we have the same spreadsheet and the same numbers, then we shouldn't have tabled it. But if there's something new, beyond a cool-off, I don't get the cool-off.
Well, I think
it's a
maybe
passionate
what we
thing
could do is instead of bringing, maybe we bring a couple of proposals. Now, here's an if then. If we did this, you maybe have 3 sets of numbers. You've heard the discussion, you know what the ranges are. Maybe we propose, what would it look like at these numbers over this period of time? So I was the one, I suggested we don't have a number, we have the discussion. Now maybe we're at a point where we could propose some numbers.
Who?
Well,
Who proposes them? That's my whole point, right here now.
Maybe the 4 trustees should propose them.
Well, that's what I said. That's what I said. You have
but
4
how can,
trustees.
we can't get together.
to-
We can't get together
Yeah.
and do. Can we get together and do that?
No.
No.
Sure.
No,
We'll figure out a way, I guess.
Well, that be, you know what?
lawyer
Then that becomes the workshop, and maybe we do have a workshop. We've had a lot. Let's have one workshop, kick some numbers around, and bring it to that meeting.
We have workshops.
let me
on
just ask this,
everything.
Rob, 3 members can meet in a subcommittee.
Correct.
3 trustees can meet.
Do we have to decide that tonight, whether we're gonna have a workshop or not? We can just, as
Well,
long
no,
as we
you can have
post it.
3, if 3 of you want
We
to
can do
meet
nothing.
together.
We have complete control. We
Right.
have our hands on the wheel and can,
So we'll either have a workshop or less than 4 of us will get together.
if
I mean,
3
there's a
trustees were willing to meet, and that would help move this along, I'm not opposed to that.
I'm willing to do that.
I'm willing to do that.
I'm on.
Okay,
So
so
there's 4 of you. See, we were good until Larry jumped in. One of you has to, I understand, but 4 people can't meet.
So we won't. 4 of us won't meet, or we'll call for a workshop. No?
What happens at the workshop?
I think we should call for a workshop.
I understand, but here's the key, again, what happens at a workshop that's different from an open meeting where you're empowered to make a decision? My whole point is a workshop is not a deciding, we use workshops for things like, for example, when the engineer says, there's a grant and there are several parts of our storm sewer infrastructure that I think you should address, and you say, wow, I don't understand that at all. I'd really like a more technical explanation of that, for example. A workshop might be where we say, well, we want to talk about an issue that's more technical in its manner. So, for example, when you first became a trustee, there were items that we were taking action on. I don't remember what they were in particular, but we'd already had workshops on them.
Right.
So by the time the issue was before us, 6 of us had already sat through a workshop where we discussed the technical aspects of an issue, and now we were prepared to debate them. So a good example would be, one way or another, this board will be forced to make a decision on the Lance Cruz Administration Building. To make a decision at a board meeting without first having a workshop to discuss what numbers are involved and what the engineer's reports are and those kinds of things, it's foolish. So there's a need to have a workshop on a subject like that. If there's data you need, that's fine, we can have a workshop. But having a workshop, in this case, if there's not additional information you need to be informed of, a workshop isn't the tool that we would employ for this. That's not the purpose of a
Look,
workshop.
I guess what I'll say, I'll make it simpler. We can sit here until 1 a.m., all right, and talk about this issue. There's not going to be a consensus from what I'm hearing, right? So my thought process is, instead of being here till 1 o'clock, just playing Ring Around the Rosie, which is what we're going to do, right? I think that's the, if 3 of the board members want to get together, that's fantastic. You can go through the data and come back with, a recommendation, no recommendation, 0, whatever. It doesn't matter. At least it'll move the discussion, either stop the discussion or move the discussion forward.
All right.
It doesn't matter, right?
If Mr. Battanti, Mr. Tominello, and Mr. Brado want to get together and discuss it, that's fine. Come up with some numbers and have them available for next meeting.
Okay.
And we'll give you 4 weeks.
24th.
By the 24th.
Right, we'll give you 4 weeks for you guys to sit down. And let me,
Really, we want them the week prior, so
sure,
that the board.
yeah,
has
3
so
weeks,
everyone's
but the point
clear.
is we want.
And if anybody needs any data, the MTA has great comparables.
Right.
You can go in there
Just-
and look at it and whatever.
From
Whatever
from
you're
Mr. Hu's perspective, do you see a problem with that as a committee of the three? Are you concerned about that in any way?
No, I don't have any concerns at all
Okay,
about that.
thanks.
Appropriate.
I think from this discussion, we have no idea what that's gonna happen, right? I mean, you wanna watch consensus building, but at the same time,
Is there a need for us to state that committee in the form of a motion, or tabling it for 4 weeks is sufficient?
Tabling it's sufficient, and it sounds like they're gonna come back with some ideas that you can discuss, specific plans to discuss. I think it's a
Okay.
good path here.
All right, good. You know, I'm not trying to silence public comment. We did take public comment. I can see there's some residents.
For the other one.
Gotcha.
oh,
Okay, good, 'cause-
We're on deck to the next one.
I'm trying hard here.
all right. We've got a motion by Mr. Tominello, with support by Mr. Brado to table the subject of full-time elected officials and the full-time deputy salary until the August 24th meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion carries. Next is public comment. 5 minutes in length, can be about anything you'd like.
It won't take me that long. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. I want to thank you for your vote in upholding the planning commission's decision to not let Kroger have their fuel station. Mr. Patanti, I'm sorry if you took offense with my kindergarten reference. I didn't mean it exactly, I think, the way you took it. It was frustration on our part because you folks were kicking things back and forth. Nobody would put a number. I'm giving you a number. You're owed 14% since 2008. But don't, no, just right now.
Moving forward, not.
14% right now, not in November of 2016, right now, because it's owed to you. That ends your discussion. You voted, it's done, but then give yourself something, an increase every year. But start with the 14% you're owed. Good night.
Thank you.
Linda Joseph, 27021 Beamer Street, forgot where I lived. Anyways, when we first moved in the township, we had our own garbage people. Everybody had their own. The garbage man would come down the road, from what I remember, and they would drive down, grab both sides, go to the next one, grab both sides. But now, lately, with even this one and the last one, they drive down one side of the road, pick up our garbage, then they come back down the other side of the road, pick up the other people's garbage. So that means they're on our road 6 times, because we have garbage, we have compost, and we have recyclables. They do that 6 times. On top of that, sometimes, and I'm not surely why, then there's a garbage truck that follows one of the garbage trucks down the road. He doesn't pick up anything. So there are days that we have 8 garbage trucks on our road on garbage day. And I just don't understand it. Why? We should only have 3 in my book. 3, you pick them up, move on, pick them up, move on. I don't understand why I can have 6 to 8 garbage trucks on my road every Thursday. Thanks.
Thank you.
Laura Roman, when I moved over here, the conversation went exactly what I was going to suggest when I heard somebody say, what is time off gonna do? That was exactly like I look at it. If you went in and asked a boss for a raise, you then have them come back and tell you what's available and is there money there? So thank you that this is something that then you go back and you decide, is there money there? If there is, what it is, what's the value? So that's what that time off is, not what the position's worth or, a comparison to others, but, is it there? Can we fund it? So that was just my thought when I first moved over. So you did address it, but that is the time off, and that's hopefully addressed, and you guys do a good job. Thank you.
Fair enough, thank you.
Hi, Dan Hogan, 27140 Beamer. Mr. Verkes, you were before, answering questions that I had or comments that I made. My next one would be this Kroger thing. You guys were talking about legal, whatever, you didn't want to say anything. Mr. Senstock said something about they're going to sue the township. I guess I'm asking right now, what would their next step be? I appreciate the way you guys voted. As a resident, you would think that it would be dead. Nobody else seems to think that. I guess what I would ask is you to rebuttal one more question and just answer that.
Sure. Okay. Hearing no, I guess there is, I'm sorry.
Thank you, William Bardell. What I want to say is, I'd like to know how many of you guys, big three, can't wait to get to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, or 8:30, and leave at 4:30. I don't see everyone lined up at 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't see people holding hands at 4:30 to walk into their cars. I don't see that. I'm not seeing the passion for this township. And I think you guys went for the enchilada. I think if you would have went for 2, 3, 4% one-shot deal, which is pretty obvious that you're not going to keep coming back every year to get it. So you went for the whole enchilada. You went for cost of living like the UAW from the 70s. The UAW doesn't even get cost of living. You're comparing these other townships that the only comparable is the comparable that you're looking at. What about Hamburg? 59.7, 59.7, and 29.80. There's more than this many townships in the thing, and the fire people, the firemen, they pull 300 people off the ground. Building official, battalion chief, you try doing them jobs. You got a nice, easy, cushy government job, enjoy it. Take 3%, 4%, one-shot deal, quit going, sticking your hand in the cookie jar. You ain't gonna get that 2% back. Take your 2, 3% and go about your business. You got your health care, you got sick days, you got a good thing going, man. You're rocking the boat. You got it going on. Just enjoy it. Enjoy it. You're making good money. You can't compare these people. These people have to, I mean, there's no comparison. Looking at these other townships, Chesterfield, they're going to see a Cinderella story going on out in Chesterfield when they got that raise. I'm going to tell you right now. And I think instead of looking at these other comparables, you should be looking at the ordinances of these other townships and see how flawed ours are and do something about that instead of dancing around a million times on that stuff. Take care of our resale value, we'll take care of you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment. I'll try to address some of the things, and I think our attorney may be able to help us out a little bit also. You know, regarding the number of trucks on the road, prior to going to a single waste hauler, Tringali was the waste hauler that I used, and there were at least 3, you know, if not 4 waste haulers that were going through the township. Whatever Tringali did back then, they do now. I do know that there was a time when waste was waste. There was no recycling and there was no, yard waste separated. So the waste stream used to be combined. I remember putting bags out. They didn't have dumpsters and they didn't have hydraulic lifts. I can certainly talk to the folks at Rizzo, but like you mentioned, Tringali did the same thing. It could very well be an OSHA requirement or a change in how they do the work, but you're right. I remember them skipping back and forth across the road, but maybe over time, you know, the guy said, hey, this is a little more hazardous. It's better to hit one side of the road and down the other. If that is their work pace, I don't feel that we're in a position to tell them, nope, we want you to go down the middle of the road and jump from side to side. So if we want 3 services, yeah, we'll probably get that. We can certainly talk to Rizzo to see if there's another way to do that, but I'm not even sure if in our contract we have the ability to tell them, you know, the number of times that they go up and down the road.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second
Sure.
there? I think the reason is really obvious. They used to go down the road right in the middle, right? The reason they just go down the right is so the guy doesn't have to go across the road and get hit by a car.
Right.
At some point, somebody got hit by a car. There was a trash company. OSHA it's probably an OSHA rule. Probably. They want you to just be getting off the truck at the right side, grab the can, bring it to the truck so you do not have to cross the road, possibly into oncoming traffic with the truck blocking your view of the lane.
And my point is
That's
without a
probably
single waste hauler, we could have 18 trucks down our road. That's what we tried to eliminate. We tried to minimize that. You know, my only statements regarding Kroger, and I'd like the attorney to answer your question more specifically, but the point is that as a deliberative body, you know, we are representatives. It would come as no surprise to you. I think it would be pretty bold of any one of us to say, oh, I wouldn't mind if there was a gas station in my backyard. I mean, I appreciate the passion that residents bring, but I feel the same way. If I were the most cynical person and I said, well, hey, I would rather cater to a dozen people who voted me in office than a corporation that I'm not answerable to them. I mean, I gotta be honest with you, you know, I don't have that relationship with Kroger. I shop there, I like the store, I don't hate them as a corporation. And they have a goal, they have the right to come and petition. You could say, I wanna build something in my backyard. You have a right to come before the board and ask the planning commission and then the board of trustees. So if I were to say to you the day you come in, sorry, I refuse to listen, it would be pretty offensive. There's a process we go through. So if we're not deliberate in how we answer those things, I think some residents had emailed me and I'd said, if I spend, you know, my days answering a lot of comments on Facebook, I'm concerned that if somebody decided to go to litigation, that those comments now lead to a problem because I'm deliberating on social media when I really should be deliberating